Look at her shoes. Are those glued together? The laughter wasn't a ripple. It was a wave, crashing down on Isabella as she stood in the center of the ballroom. She was surrounded by billionaires, titans of industry, and the cruelest socialites in Manhattan. They saw a girl in a thrift store dress, soaking wet from the rain, trembling as she held a tray of hors d'oeuvres. They thought she was the help. They thought she was a joke. But what none of them knew, what the woman laughing the loudest, Victoria St. James, was about to find out the hard way, was that Isabella wasn't there to serve them. She was there to evict them. In exactly 1 hour, the girl in the muddy shoes would sign a document that would strip the St. James family of their entire legacy. This is the story of the quietest girl in the room, and the noise she made when the truth finally came out. It was a Tuesday night in November, the kind of New York evening where the rain doesn't just fall, it assaults you. The wind whipped down Fifth Avenue, turning umbrellas inside out and soaking anyone foolish enough to be walking. Isabella Bella Thorne was walking. She clutched her coat tighter around her frame. It was a charcoal grey wool coat she'd bought at a Goodwill in Queens for $12. The hem was fraying, and one of the buttons was held on by a safety pin, but it was warm. Underneath, she wore a simple black dress that had seen better days, and a pair of flats that were currently squelching with every step. She stopped in front of the colossal gilded doors of the Pierre Hotel. Tonight was the Gala for the Future, an annual charity auction hosted by the Montgomery Kensington Trust. It was the single most exclusive event on the East Coast social calendar. A ticket cost $50,000. Just to stand in the lobby required a net worth that could buy a small island. Bella didn't have a ticket. She had a staff badge hidden in her pocket, or at least that's what she wanted the security to think. "Service entrance is around back, sweetheart," the doorman sneered. He didn't even look her in the face. He was busy scanning the driveway for the line of black Cadillac Escalades and Rolls-Royce Phantoms that were beginning to queue up. "I'm not with the catering company," Bella said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm on the list." The doorman finally looked down. He took in the wet hair plastered to her forehead, the cheap coat, and the water pooling around her shoes. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "The list? Which list?" "The waiting list for the soup kitchen." "Check the guest list," Bella repeated. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. "Please." With an exaggerated sigh, the doorman pulled a tablet from his podium. He scrolled through the names, his finger tapping impatiently. "Name? Isabella Thorne." He scrolled. He stopped. He frowned. He refreshed the page and scrolled again. "There's no Thorne here." "Look, kid, I don't know who put you up to this, but you need to—" "Check under H," she interrupted. "My +1. "You have a +1. He laughed again, louder this time. "And who exactly is dragging a drowned rat into a black tie gala? The janitor?" "Isabella Harrington," she whispered, almost inaudibly. The doorman froze. The name Harrington wasn't just a name in New York, it was a monument. The Harrington family had built half the railroads in the 19th century and bought the other half of the city in the 20th. But the Harringtons were gone, vanished from the public eye after the tragic death of the patriarch Richard Harrington 20 years ago. The granddaughter, the sole heir, was a myth. A ghost story told in boardrooms. He typed in Harrington. The screen of his tablet flashed a bright solid gold border. VIP access. All areas. Do not detain. The color drained from the doorman's face. He looked at the girl in the wet wool coat, then back at the tablet. It had to be a glitch, a hacker, a prank. But the code on the screen was signed by the board of directors of the World Bank. I don't, he stammered. Is there a problem? A sharp voice cut through the rain. Stepping out of a silver Bentley was Victoria St. James. If New York had royalty, Victoria was the queen bee. She was 25, beautiful in a terrifying way, and wearing a custom red Versace gown that likely cost more than Bella's entire college tuition. Hanging off her arm was Charles Montgomery, the son of the gala's host, a man with a jawline carved from granite and eyes empty of anything resembling empathy. "This individual is claiming to be on the list, Ms. St. James," the doorman said, quickly sensing an ally. "I was just removing her." Victoria turned her gaze on Bella. It was like being scanned by a predator. She looked at the fraying hem, the safety pin, the wet hair. Oh, let her in, Victoria smirked, linking her arm tighter with Charles. We need someone to hold our coats, don't we, Charles? The coat checkline is simply dreadful. Charles chuckled, a low, cruel sound. Charity, Victoria. It is a charity gala after all. Let the stray dog dry off in the foyer. The doorman hesitated, but the golden border on his screen was still blinking. He stepped aside, confused and terrified. Right this way, miss. Victoria leaned in close to Bella as she swept past, the scent of Chanel No. 5 overwhelming the smell of the rain. Don't touch anything, Victoria whispered. You look like you carry diseases. Bella didn't respond. She just walked through the golden doors, into the warmth, leaving the storm outside. But she knew the real storm was waiting for her in the ballroom. The grand ballroom of the Pierre was a kaleidoscope of diamonds, silk, and old money. A string quartet played Debussy in the corner, though no one was listening. The air hummed with the sound of deals being made and reputations being shredded. Bella stood near a marble pillar, trying to blend into the architecture. She had removed her wet coat, revealing a simple, sleeveless black dress. It was vintage, 1950s, but to the untrained eye it looked plain. Unfashionable. Is that a waiter? No, waiters wear white jackets. I think she's lost. Maybe she's a contest winner, or a charity case. The whispers started the moment she picked up a glass of sparkling water. Bella kept her head down, her dark hair shielding her face. She was scanning the room, looking for one person. Arthur Damien, the executor of her grandfather's estate. He was the only one who knew her face. He was the only one who knew that today, her 25th birthday, was the day the trust fund unlocked. But before she could find him, she was found by the wolf pack. Victoria St. James had held court at a centre table surrounded by her entourage, a mix of social climbers, minor royalty, and hedge fund managers. She spotted Bella standing alone and her eyes lit up with malicious delight. Charles, look, Victoria pointed with a manicured nail. The stray dog made it to the buffet. Charles Montgomery swirled his scotch. Brave, or stupid. Let's have some fun, Victoria said. She stood up, smoothing her red dress, and glided across the floor. The crowd parted for her. They knew better than to stand in Victoria's way when she had a target. She stopped right in front of Bella. The music seemed to dip. The room grew quieter. People sensed blood in the water. Excuse me, Victoria said, her voice sickly sweet. I think you have something of mine. Bella looked up, meeting Victoria's gaze. I beg your pardon. My drink, Victoria said, gesturing to the water in Bella's hand. I asked for a sparkling water 5 minutes ago. You are the help, aren't you? Or did you just wander in off the street to steal the silverware? I'm a guest, Bella said calmly. A ripple of laughter went through the crowd gathering around them. A guest? Victoria laughed, turning to the audience for validation. Did you hear that, Charles? She thinks she's a guest. Oh, honey, look at you. Your dress looks like something my grandmother was buried in. Actually, Bella said, her voice gaining a steely edge, it's a 1954 Balenciaga original. It belonged to my grandmother. Victoria rolled her eyes. Sure it is. And I'm the Queen of England. Listen, sweetie, why don't you make yourself useful? Run to the bar and get me a gin and tonic. Heavy on the gin. I need it to tolerate looking at your shoes. Bella didn't move. No. The room gasped. Nobody said no to Victoria St. James. Not here. Not in this city. Victoria's smile vanished. Her face hardened into a mask of pure rage. She took a step closer, invading Bella's personal space. Do you know who I am? My father is Senator St. James. My mother is on the board of this hotel. I can have you thrown out into the gutter where you belong before you can blink. And who are you? Charles Montgomery joined in, towering over Bella. Really? Who let you in? Security. A burly security guard began to push through the crowd. I suggest you leave, Charles sneered, before you embarrass yourself further. You don't belong here. You smell like poverty. Victoria grabbed a glass of red wine from a passing tray. She looked at the dark liquid, then at Bella's dress. Oops, she whispered. With a flick of her wrist, she threw the wine. It splashed across Bella's chest, staining the vintage black fabric with a dark, wet blotch that dripped down to the floor. The crowd erupted, some in shock, many in laughter. "Oh no," Victoria cried in mock horror, her hands over her mouth. "I am so clumsy. But honestly, it's an improvement. At least now the dress has some color." Tears pricked the corners of Bella's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She stood there dripping with wine, the center of hundreds of mocking eyes. Phones were out. People were recording. This would be on TikTok and Instagram stories within minutes. Just gala crasher, just John trash took itself out. "Security," Charles barked. "Escort this mess out." The guard reached for Bella's arm. "Come on, miss. Let's go without a scene." "Don't touch me," Bella said. Her voice was different now. The softness was gone. It was replaced by a tone of command that stopped the guard in his tracks. She reached into her small, battered clutch and pulled out a handkerchief to dab at the wine. Then she looked past Victoria, past Charles, toward the stage at the front of the room. A man had just walked onto the podium. He was elderly, with silver hair and a suit that cost more than the building. It was Arthur Damien. He tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice boomed over the speakers, "if I could have your attention, we are about to begin the main auction. But first, I have a very special announcement regarding the ownership of the Harrington Trust, which controls, well, the ground you are currently standing on." Victoria laughed, flipping her hair. "Boring. Come on, Charles, let's go get better seats. I want to see them drag the trash out." "Wait," Bella said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried. She walked past Victoria, bumping her shoulder hard enough to make the socialite stumble. "Hey," Victoria shrieked, "where do you think you're going?" Bella didn't look back. She walked straight toward the stage. The security guard moved to intercept her, but Arthur Damien from the podium saw her. His eyes went wide. He raised a hand, signaling the guards to stand down. The room fell into a confused silence. Why was the old billionaire waving at the girl in the wine-stained dress? Bella climbed the stairs to the stage. She stood next to Arthur Damien. She looked out at the sea of faces, the people who had laughed, the people who had sneered, and Victoria St. James, whose jaw was currently hitting the floor. Arthur Damien leaned into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. I was waiting for the guest of honor." He turned to Bella and bowed, deeply, respectfully. "Welcome home, Ms. Harrington." The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. Victoria St. James stood frozen, her hand still extended in the air where she had been pointing at Bella. Her face, usually a mask of perfect porcelain indifference, was cracking. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Arthur Damien didn't look at the crowd. He looked at Bella. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silk handkerchief. "For the wine, Miss Harrington," he said softly. Bella took it, wiping the red stain on her vintage dress. "Thank you, Arthur. It's been a long time." "Too long," Arthur replied. Then he turned to the microphone. His voice, usually warm and grandfatherly, turned into the cold, hard steel of a man who managed a $40 billion portfolio. "For 7 years," Arthur addressed the room, "the Harrington seat has remained empty. Many of you speculated that the line had ended. Some of you," he cast a withering glance at Charles Montgomery, "hoped it had ended, so you could carve up the empire like vultures." Charles took a step back, his face paling. "But Richard Harrington was a man who believed that character is forged in fire," Arthur continued. "He added a codicil to his will, the pauper's clause. It stated that his heir could not claim a single cent until she had lived for 7 years without the safety net of the family name. She had to work, struggle, and survive on her own. And finally, she had to appear at this specific gala on her 25th birthday, wearing the clothes of a working woman to see who would treat her with dignity and who would treat her with disdain." Arthur paused, letting the words sink in. He looked directly at Victoria. "It seems, Ms. St. James, that you failed the test." Victoria finally found her voice. It was shrill and desperate. "This is ridiculous. It's a trick. Look at her. She's nobody. She was serving drinks." "I wasn't serving drinks, Victoria," Bella said, stepping up to the microphone. Her voice was amplified, booming through the hall. "I was watching. I was watching how you treat people you think can't do anything for you." Bella looked out at the sea of faces. The same people who had laughed minutes ago were now looking at their shoes, terrified. "My grandfather built this city," Bella said, her voice shaking slightly with emotion but gaining strength with every word. "He built the subways you ride, the hospitals you go to, and this hotel. He didn't build it for people who think a net worth is a personality trait. He built it for people who work." She reached into her damp coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. The doorman's rejection slip. She dropped it on the podium. "Arthur," Bella said, "where are the papers?" Arthur signaled to an aide who rushed forward with a leather-bound portfolio. He opened it on the podium. "The transfer of assets requires only a signature, Ms. Harrington. Once signed, the board of directors is dissolved and reconstituted under your sole discretion." Bella picked up the gold pen. "Wait," Charles Montgomery shouted. He pushed past a waiter, his face red with panic. "You can't do this. My father is on that board. You can't just fire the entire directorate because someone spilled wine on you." "Watch me," Bella whispered. She signed her name, Isabella Marie Harrington. As she lifted the pen, the lights in the ballroom seemed to flicker. A heavy thud echoed from the back of the room, the sound of the heavy oak doors being barred. Arthur leaned in close to her, his celebratory demeanor vanishing instantly. "Bella," he whispered urgently, his hand gripping her elbow. "Smile for the cameras. But listen to me carefully. You just became the richest woman in New York. You also just became the most targeted person in this room." "I know," Bella said, forcing a smile for the flashing cameras. "No, you don't," Arthur hissed. "Look at the exits. Charles's security team has blocked them. They aren't going to let you leave with that portfolio. We need to move. Now." The applause was deafening, but to Bella it sounded like static. The reality of what she had just done was crashing down on her. She wasn't just an heiress, she was a threat to the established order of the city's most ruthless families. Arthur guided her off the stage, not down the main stairs, but toward the heavy velvet curtains behind the bandstand. "Where are we going?" Bella asked, hiking up her wine-stained dress to move faster. "Backstage corridors," Arthur said, moving with surprising speed. "My car is waiting at the south loading dock. We need to get you to the secure safe house before the news hits the global markets. Once the stock shifts, the knives will come out." Literally. They entered a narrow concrete hallway, the glamour of the ballroom replaced by exposed pipes and flickering fluorescent lights. The music from the gala was muffled here, a distant hum. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows of a linen closet. Bella gasped and stopped, Arthur instinctively stepping in front of her. The man was tall, wearing a tuxedo that fit him poorly, like he was used to wearing something else. He had messy dark hair and eyes that were scanning the hallway for threats. "You're going the wrong way, Arthur," the man said. His voice was rough, gravelly. "Lucas?" Arthur exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "Bella, this is Lucas. He works for the estate, off the books." Bella looked at him. This was the man she had seen watching her from the periphery all night. The one she thought was a waiter who just wasn't doing his job. "Lucas Hale," the man said, nodding to her. "Investigative journalist, and currently your only hope of getting out of here without a kidnapping headline." "Kidnapping?" Bella asked, her blood running cold. "Montgomery's team isn't just blocking the doors to keep you in," Lucas said, walking toward them. "They've jammed the cell signals in the ballroom. They want to force a negotiation regarding the board seats before you leave the building. Basically, they want to bully you into signing a power of attorney." "They can't do that," Bella said. "It's illegal." Lucas laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You have $40 billion, Mrs. Harrington. The law is just a suggestion to people like Charles Montgomery. Now we can't take the South Dock. They have 2 SUVs waiting there." "Then how do we get out?" Arthur asked, wiping sweat from his brow. "The kitchen," Lucas said. "It's chaotic, it's loud, and the delivery trucks are coming in for the midnight shift. I have a bike parked near the grease traps." "A bike?" Arthur frowned. "Ms. Harrington cannot ride on the back of a motorcycle." "She can if she wants to live," Lucas said. He looked at Bella. "Your choice, princess. The limo with the target painted on it, or the scenic route through the garbage?" Bella looked at her vintage dress. She looked at the terrified expression on Arthur's face. Then she looked at Lucas. He didn't look scared. He looked ready. "The scenic route," Bella said. Good, Lucas said. Give Arthur the portfolio. They'll be looking for you carrying the papers. Arthur, you take the main elevator. Act decoy. Let them detain you. You're a lawyer. You can stall them for hours. And Bella? Arthur asked, clutching the leather folder. I'll get her out, Lucas promised. Go, Bella told Arthur. I trust him. She didn't know why she said it, but she felt it. Lucas was the only thing in this hotel that felt real. Arthur squeezed her hand one last time and disappeared down the hallway toward the elevators. All right, Lucas said, turning to Bella. Take off your heels. You can't run in those. Bella kicked off the expensive, squelching flats she had worn in the rain. She stood barefoot on the cold concrete. Let's go, Lucas said. They began to run. They sprinted past the laundry rooms, past the break rooms where staff were smoking illicit cigarettes. They could hear shouting behind them, heavy boots on the floor. Charles's security team had breached the backstage area. Faster, Lucas urged. They burst through a set of swinging double doors and into the chaotic, steaming heat of the main kitchen. Chefs screamed. Waiters dropped trays. The air was thick with the smell of roasting beef and truffle oil. Hey, you can't be in here, a head chef yelled, waving a ladle. Health inspector, Lucas shouted back without breaking stride. They wove through the prep stations, dodging sous chefs and hot pans. Behind them, the double doors burst open again. Two men in dark suits with earpieces scanned the room. There she is, one of them shouted. Bella's heart hammered against her ribs. She vaulted over a crate of lettuce, her bare feet slipping on the greasy tile. Lucas grabbed her hand, pulling her upright. Through here. Lucas pointed to the service exit at the far end, next to the dish pit. They reached the door just as the security guards began to shove their way through the line of cooks. Lucas slammed the crash bar, and they spilled out into the cold, rainy night air of the loading dock. The transition from the sweltering kitchen to the freezing rain was a shock to the system. Bella gasped, the cold air burning her lungs. My bike is there, Lucas pointed to a black Ducati tucked behind a dumpster, but as they ran toward it, a black SUV screeched around the corner, blocking their path. The window rolled down. It was Charles Montgomery. Get in the car, Bella, Charles shouted, his charming mask completely gone. Don't make this ugly. Lucas stepped in front of her. She's not going with you, Charles. Move, you gutter rat, Charles sneered, or I'll run you over. Lucas looked at Bella over his shoulder. Do you trust me? Yes, she breathed. Lucas reached into his jacket. He didn't pull a gun. He pulled a fire alarm lever mounted on the external wall of the loading dock. Clang, 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 clang. The deafening sound of the hotel's fire alarm ripped through the air. Within seconds, the emergency sprinklers in the loading bay triggered, spraying high-pressure water everywhere. The sudden deluge blinded Charles's driver. The SUV swerved, hitting a stack of pallets. Now, Lucas yelled. He grabbed Bella, threw her onto the back of the Ducati, and kicked the starter. The engine roared to life, screaming over the sound of the alarm. As they sped out of the alleyway, tires spinning on the wet pavement, Bella looked back. She saw Charles Montgomery standing in the rain, screaming, watching his $40 billion problem disappear into the New York night. The adrenaline from the ballroom evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold dread that settled in the pit of Bella's stomach. The kitchen was chaotic, chefs shouting orders, waiters rushing in with dirty plates, but in the narrow corridor near the loading dock, it was just Bella and Lucas. Lucas Vance looked different than she remembered. 5 years ago, he was a scruffy journalism student who tipped well at the diner she worked at. Now he wore a leather jacket that had seen too much action and had a scar running through his left eyebrow. He looked tired, dangerous. Keep your voice down, Bella hissed, pulling him deeper into the shadows, away from the prying ears of the sous chefs. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Lucas pulled a small battered notebook from his pocket. Richard Harrington. Found dead in his study 20 years ago. Officially ruled a heart attack. But the autopsy report, the real one, not the one they released to the press, showed traces of digitalis. Poison. Bella leaned back against the cold tile wall, closing her eyes. Stop. The will you just executed, Lucas pressed on, stepping closer. It has a secondary clause, the shadow clause. It stipulates that if the heir ever claims the fortune, they also inherit the investigation. You have to find out who killed him, Bella, or the trust dissolves and the money goes to the state. I know, she snapped, her eyes flying open. Why do you think I waited until the very last day to claim it? Why do you think I hid for 7 years? I wasn't just learning humility, Lucas. I was hiding. Whoever killed my grandfather is still on the board. One of those people clapping for me in the ballroom is a murderer. Lucas looked at her, his expression softening slightly. You need help. You have Arthur Damien, sure. He's a suit. He can move money. But can he watch your back when you walk home? Can he track a burner phone? Can he break into a safe? And you can. I've spent the last 5 years exposing corporate fraud in Eastern Europe, Lucas said with a grim smile. I'm good at finding things people want hidden, and I'm cheap. All I want is the exclusive story when this is over. Bella studied him. She needed an ally. Arthur was loyal, but he was old and operated within the law. She needed someone who could operate in the grey. Fine, she whispered, but we have to leave, now. Before Victoria St. James finds a way to retaliate, or worse, before the killer realizes I know. Too late for the retaliation part, Lucas said, nodding toward the service exit. Through the small window in the door, they could see flashing lights, police lights. They aren't here for you, Lucas said quickly. Look. Bella peered through the glass. Outside in the rain, 2 officers were handcuffing a man in a tuxedo. It was the doorman who had tried to stop her earlier. And next to him, arguing furiously with a sergeant, was Charles Montgomery. I called in a tip, Lucas shrugged, told them there was a distribution of illegal narcotics happening at the coat check. It's a distraction. You planted drugs? Bella asked, horrified and impressed. I didn't plant anything. Charles Montgomery does keep cocaine in the coat check. I just told the cops where to look. Lucas grinned. Come on, my motorcycle is out back. Bella looked down at her 1954 Balenciaga dress. I can't ride a motorcycle in this. Lucas took off his leather jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled like rain and old tobacco. You're the Queen of New York now, Bella. You can do whatever you want. They didn't go to the Harrington mansion. That was the first place anyone would look. Instead, Lucas took her to a safe house, a gritty industrial loft in Bushwick that served as his office and home. For the next 3 days, Bella didn't sleep. She sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes of files Arthur Damien had secretly couriered over. The shadow clause was specific. She had 72 hours after claiming the inheritance to identify the viper in the nest. If she failed, the assets would freeze. It has to be someone who was on the board 20 years ago, Bella muttered, rubbing her temples. She was wearing one of Lucas's flannel shirts, her expensive dress hanging carefully on a mannequin in the corner. That narrows it down to 3 people, Lucas said, pinning photos to a corkboard on the wall. Arthur Damien, Charles Montgomery's father, Silas, and Eleanor St. James, Victoria's mother. Arthur loved my grandfather, Bella said, shaking her head. He raised me from a distance. Money changes people, Bella. He's the executor. If you die or if you fail, he stays in control of the trust indefinitely. Bella looked at the photo of Arthur, the man who had bowed to her, the man who had defended her. Could it be a long con? What about Silas Montgomery? She asked. Silas was in debt up to his eyeballs in the 90s, Lucas noted, tapping a financial report. Richard Harrington refused to bail him out. A week later, Richard is dead, and Silas suddenly finds the capital to save his company. Suspicious. And Eleanor? Eleanor, Lucas sighed. She was Richard's mistress. Bella froze. What? It's not in the official bios, Lucas said, pulling out a grainy black-and-white photo of a young Eleanor St. James and Richard Harrington on a yacht in Monaco. But they were involved. Rumor has it he broke it off the night he died. She's a scorned lover with a taste for poison. Digitalis comes from foxgloves. Eleanor is a master gardener. She wins the Chelsea Flower Show every year. Bella stood up, pacing the room. So it's the jilted lover, the desperate debtor, or the ambitious best friend. It's like a bad novel. It's a classic motive, Lucas said, but we need proof. Hard proof. And the only place that proof exists is in the Harrington safe, in the study where he died. The mansion has been sealed for 20 years, Bella said. Arthur has the only key. Then we need to get Arthur to open it, Lucas said. Tonight is the board ratification meeting. They have to formally recognize you as CEO. All three of them will be there. Bella looked at the clock, 5 p.m. The meeting was at 8 p.m. I need a new dress, she said, a steely glint returning to her eyes. We're in Bushwick, Lucas laughed. The only thing open is a vintage shop and a bodega. Perfect, Bella smiled. The last time I wore old clothes, I took down a socialite. Tonight, I take down a murderer. 3 hours later, Bella walked into the boardroom of the Harrington Tower. She wasn't wearing Balenciaga this time. She was wearing a crimson power suit she'd found at the vintage shop for $40. It was sharp, tailored, and aggressive. She wore combat boots underneath. The three suspects sat at the long mahogany table. Arthur Damien at the head, looking relieved to see her. Silas Montgomery looking like he'd swallowed a lemon. Eleanor St. James looking icy and composed, sipping tea. You're late, Silas grunted. We were about to start without you. I was busy, Bella said, throwing a file folder onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Eleanor. What is this? Eleanor asked, raising a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Receipts, Bella lied. From a pharmacy in 2004, prescriptions for digitalis. The room went dead silent. The air conditioning hummed. Eleanor didn't flinch. She just stared at the folder. Is this a joke? Open it, Bella challenged. Eleanor reached out a hand. Her fingers were trembling, just slightly. A micro-tremor, but Bella saw it. And so did Lucas, who was posing as a waiter in the corner, a hidden camera in his vest button. I don't need to open this trash, Eleanor said, pulling her hand back. You're a child playing detective. Your grandfather died of a heart attack. Did he? Arthur Damien spoke up. His voice was grave. Bella, what is this about? It's about the tea, Arthur, Bella said, turning to look at the cup Eleanor was sipping. Grandfather drank tea every night. Foxglove tea tastes bitter. You have to mask it with something strong, like Earl Grey. That's what you're drinking, isn't it, Eleanor? Eleanor slammed her cup down. This is preposterous. I am leaving. Sit down, Silas Montgomery roared. He looked at Bella. If she killed him, if she killed Richard, that's why the merger failed? Because he was dead. She killed him because he was going to cut her off, Bella said, improvising, watching Eleanor's reaction. He was going to tell the world about the affair, and about the child. Eleanor's face went white. This was a guess, a wild, reckless guess Bella had concocted based on the timeline. He promised to keep it secret, Eleanor shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair over. He promised. So you admit it, Bella said softly. Eleanor clamped her hand over her mouth. Her eyes darted around the room. She realized what she had said. The mask had slipped. You, Eleanor hissed. She reached into her purse. She didn't pull out a gun. She pulled out a small glass vial. Stop her, Lucas shouted, leaping over the refreshment cart. Eleanor uncorked the vial and raised it to her lips. She wasn't going to prison. She was going out on her own terms. But Arthur Damien was faster than anyone expected for a man of 70. He threw his heavy ledger across the table, striking Eleanor's hand. The vial flew across the room and shattered against the wall. Security! Arthur bellowed. The doors burst open, but it wasn't private security. It was the NYPD. Detective Miller, the brother of the doorman Bella had promoted, stepped in. Eleanor St. James, you are under arrest for the murder of Richard Harrington. Eleanor was dragged out, screaming curses at Bella. You're just like him. You'll die alone just like him. As the silence returned to the boardroom, Bella slumped into a chair. Her legs were shaking. Silas Montgomery looked at her with a newfound fear. So, he cleared his throat. About the merger. Are we still good? Bella looked at the man who had raised a son like Charles. We'll see, Silas, we'll see. She turned to Arthur. Thank you for throwing the book at her, literally. Arthur smiled weakly. I always said the ledger was the most powerful tool in business. Bella looked over at Lucas. He gave her a thumbs up and tapped his hidden camera. They had it all. But as they walked out of the building that night, Bella realized the story wasn't over. The victory felt hollow. What's wrong? Lucas asked as they stood on the sidewalk. You won. You got the money, the company, and the killer. Eleanor said something. Bella frowned. She said, about the child. She didn't deny there was a child. Lucas paused. So? So. Bella looked up at the skyscraper that now belonged to her. If Eleanor and my grandfather had a child, that means I have an aunt or uncle out there. Someone who has a claim to half of this fortune. Lucas groaned. You have got to be kidding me. Another mystery? No, Bella smiled, hailing a cab. Not a mystery, a family reunion. But first, I need to buy some new shoes. These combat boots are killing me. 6 months had passed since the night the girl in the rain took the throne of New York. The city had changed, or perhaps it was just the lens through which Isabella viewed it that had shifted. The winter slush had melted into a humid, restless spring. The headlines had moved on from the scandal of the gala to the brutal efficiency of the new Harrington regime. Isabella sat in the office that had once belonged to her grandfather, Richard Harrington. It was a cavernous room of mahogany and shadows, located on the 80th floor of the Harrington Tower. When she first walked in, the room had smelled of cigars and old secrets. Now it smelled of fresh coffee and ozone. She had ripped down the heavy velvet drapes, letting the harsh, unyielding sunlight flood the space. She wasn't wearing Balenciaga today. She wore a pair of dark denim jeans, a white silk blouse, and the same scuffed combat boots she had worn the night she raided the safe. Her staff called her the Iron Heiress behind her back, but they respected her. She had fired the entire board of directors, 20 men who had grown fat on corruption, in a single afternoon. In their place, she had appointed a council of young, hungry innovators, many of whom came from the same scholarship programs her grandfather had secretly funded. But there was one loose thread, one ghost that still haunted the tower. The intercom on her desk buzzed. Ms. Harrington, Lucas is here. He says it's urgent. Isabella felt a jolt in her chest. Lucas Hale had been gone for 3 weeks. After Eleanor St. James had been arrested for the murder of Richard Harrington, she had dropped one final bombshell, the child, a secret heir born from her affair with Richard, hidden away to protect the family reputation. Lucas had gone underground to find him. Send him in, Isabella said, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. The heavy doors swung open. Lucas looked exhausted. He hadn't shaved in days, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights in cheap motels. But his eyes were alert, burning with the thrill of the hunt. He carried a thick, battered file folder under his arm. You look terrible, Isabella said, standing up. You look expensive, Lucas countered with a tired grin, dropping into one of the guest chairs. But the boots ruin the aesthetic. The boots keep me grounded, she said, walking around the desk. Did you find him? Lucas didn't answer immediately. He opened the folder and slid a photograph across the desk. It wasn't a picture of a child. It was a picture of a man in his 40s wiping grease from his hands with a rag. He was standing in front of a dilapidated auto repair shop in Newark, New Jersey. He wore a mechanic's jumpsuit with the name Mike stitched over the pocket. His name is Michael Mike Damien, Lucas said quietly, though his birth certificate lists him as Baby Boy Doe. Eleanor abandoned him at a church in upstate New York 3 days after he was born. She paid the orphanage a monthly stipend to keep his records sealed, but she never visited. Not once. Isabella stared at the photo. The man had a rough face, weathered by sun and hard labor, but the eyes, piercing, intelligent, and deeply blue, were identical to the eyes in the portrait of Richard Harrington hanging behind her. Does he know? Isabella whispered. He knows he was adopted, Lucas said. He knows his mother was a rich woman who didn't want him. He doesn't know he's the heir to half of the Harrington fortune. Half, Isabella repeated. The word hung in the air. If Michael Damien was Richard's son, he had a legitimate claim to 50% of the assets. That was $20 billion. It was enough money to topple economies. It was enough money to destroy a man's life. He's outside, Lucas said. Isabella froze. You brought him here. I told him I was a lawyer looking into a class action lawsuit regarding the orphanage, Lucas explained. He thinks he's here to sign a witness statement for $500. Bring him in. When Michael Damien entered the office, the contrast was jarring. He looked at the opulence of the room with a mixture of awe and defensive cynicism. He smelled of motor oil and stale tobacco. His hands were calloused, the knuckles scarred. He looked at Isabella, then at Lucas. "Look, lady," Michael said, his voice gravelly and thick with a Jersey accent. "I got a shift starting at 4. If this is about the orphanage, I already told your guy. I don't remember much. It was a long time ago." Isabella walked toward him. She didn't extend a hand, she just studied him. "It's not about the orphanage, Michael." "Then what is it?" He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Am I in trouble?" Isabella picked up the remote for the wall screen. A digital image of Richard Harrington appeared. "Do you know who this is?" Michael squinted at the screen. "Some rich guy. Saw him on the news a few times. Dead, right?" "That is Richard Harrington," Isabella said. "He was my grandfather. And he was your father." The silence that followed was absolute. The hum of the air conditioning sounded like a roar. Michael stared at the screen, then at Isabella, and finally let out a harsh, barking laugh. "Okay," he said, turning to Lucas. "Is this a prank show? Where are the cameras? You think because I fix cars I'm stupid?" "It's not a joke, Mr. Damien," Lucas said, sliding a DNA report across the desk. "We ran the test against the sample you gave me on the coffee cup yesterday. It's a 99.9% match." Michael picked up the paper. His hands were shaking. He read the lines, his brow furrowing. He looked up at Isabella, the cynicism draining from his face, replaced by a profound, disorienting shock. "My mother," Michael stammered. "She was—" "Eleanor St. James," Isabella said softly. "She's currently awaiting trial for poisoning him. It's a complicated family." Michael collapsed into the chair, the paper fluttering to the floor. "So what? You brought me here to pay me off? To sign something saying I won't sue you?" Isabella leaned against her desk, crossing her arms. "No, I brought you here to ask you what you want." "What I want?" "Legally, you are entitled to half of this company," Isabella said. "The buildings, the railroads, the tech division, half of it is yours. We can start the transfer process today. You'll be a billionaire by morning." Michael looked around the room. He looked at the view of the city, a city he had likely looked at from the ground up his entire life. He looked at his grease-stained fingernails. "I fix transmissions," Michael said quietly. "I have a wife, Sherry. She teaches 2nd grade. We have a dog. We have a mortgage on a 2-bedroom house that we're finally paying down." He looked up at Isabella, his eyes hardening. "If I take this money, what happens to them?" "Everything changes," Isabella said honestly. "People will treat you differently. Friends will become strangers. Strangers will become best friends. You will never know if someone loves you or your bank account. You will have security, Michael, but you will lose your peace." Michael stood up. He walked to the window and looked down at the ants crawling on 5th Avenue. He stood there for a long time. Finally, he turned back. "Keep it," he said. Lucas dropped his pen. "Excuse me." "I said keep it," Michael said, his voice firmer now. "I don't want to run a railroad. I don't want to sit in meetings with guys in suits who think I'm trash because I work with my hands. I'm happy, lady." "Are you?" The question caught Isabella off guard. Was she happy? She was powerful. She was vindicated. But happy? "I'm working on it," Isabella replied. "Tell you what," Michael said, scratching his chin. "My shop, the landlord is selling the building. He's kicking us out next month. I've been trying to get a loan to buy it, but the banks won't touch me." Isabella smiled. It was the first genuine smile she had felt in weeks. "How much is the building?" 400 grand. "I'll write the check," Isabella said. "Consider it a signing bonus for a silent consultancy role." Michael grinned, and for a second he looked exactly like Richard Harrington. "Deal, but I'm not wearing a suit. Ever." An hour later, Isabella and Lucas walked Michael out of the building. As they stood on the sidewalk, the spring sun dipping below the skyline, a figure emerged from the shadows of the adjacent alley. It was Victoria St. James. The transformation was shocking. Gone was the red Versace gown. Gone was the entourage of sneering socialites. Victoria was wearing a grey wool coat, shockingly similar to the one Isabella had worn to the gala. Her hair was pulled back in a messy, fraying knot. She looked thinner, her cheekbones sharp and hollow. She didn't approach them with aggression, she approached them like a ghost. "Bella," Victoria said. Her voice was brittle. Lucas stepped forward, his hand instinctively going to his hip, but Isabella touched his arm. "It's okay." "What do you want, Victoria?" Isabella asked. Victoria looked at Michael, then back at Isabella. She saw the mechanic shaking hands with the heiress. She saw the way they stood, not as royalty and peasant, but as equals. "They took everything," Victoria whispered. "The lawyers. Because of my mother. They froze the assets. They seized the penthouse. Charles Montgomery filed a restraining order against me to distance himself from the scandal. I have nowhere to go." She looked at Isabella, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm hungry, Bella. I'm actually hungry." It was the moment of ultimate revenge. This was the woman who had poured wine on her. This was the woman who had called her a stray dog. Isabella could have laughed. She could have called security. It would have been justice. But Isabella looked at her own combat boots. She remembered the feeling of the rain soaking through her socks 6 months ago. She remembered that cruelty is a cycle, and someone has to be strong enough to break it. Isabella reached into her bag. She didn't pull out cash. She pulled out a business card for the Harrington Foundation. "Go to this address," Isabella said, handing her the card. "Ask for the intake director. Her name is Sherry." Victoria looked at the card, confused. Is this money?" "No," Isabella said firmly. "It's a job." Victoria recoiled slightly. "A job?" "It's a shelter for women trying to get back on their feet," Isabella said. "You can stay there. You get a bed and a hot meal, but you have to work in the kitchen. You have to serve the food. You have to wash the dishes." Victoria stared at her, her face flushing with a mix of shame and indignation. "You want me to be a maid?" "I want you to learn what it feels like to serve others," Isabella said, her voice hard but not cruel. "It's the only way you'll ever survive, Victoria. The St. James name is dead. You have to build a new one. And you start by scrubbing the pots." Victoria held the card. Her hand trembled. She looked at the passing cars, at the indifference of the city that used to worship her. Then she looked at Isabella. "Thank you," she whispered. It was barely audible, but it was there. She turned and walked away, clutching the card like a lifeline, disappearing into the crowd of commuters. "You're softer than I would have been," Lucas murmured, watching her go. "I didn't do it for her," Isabella said, turning to look at the Harrington Tower rising above them. "I did it for the girl in the grey raincoat. She would have wanted me to be kind." She turned to Michael. "Can I offer you a ride home, Uncle Mike? My driver is waiting." Michael laughed, shaking his head. "Nah, I'm taking the subway. It's faster. But hey, come by the shop sometime. I'll teach you how to change your own oil. You can't run a city if you don't know how an engine works." "I'd like that," Isabella said. As Michael walked toward the subway station, blending in with the working-class heroes of the city, Isabella felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The secret was out. The killer was gone. The fortune was secured. But more importantly, she knew who she was. She wasn't the clothes she wore. She wasn't the name on the building. She was Isabella. "So," Lucas said, nudging her shoulder, the billionaire mechanic turned down the fortune. "The evil queen is scrubbing dishes. And you—" "I have a board meeting in 20 minutes, Isabella said, checking her watch. "Boring," Lucas groaned. "I was going to suggest pizza. There's a place in Brooklyn that's terrible, but the beer is cheap." Isabella stopped. She looked at the revolving doors of her tower, then at Lucas. She thought about the endless spreadsheets waiting for her. Then she thought about the taste of cheap beer and the feeling of the wind on the back of a motorcycle. "Cancel the meeting," Isabella said, a mischievous spark returning to her eyes. "Really?" "Yeah," she smiled, linking her arm through his. "Let's go get some pizza, but you're paying. I'm saving up for a new pair of boots." They walked down the street together, not as the queen and her knight, but just two people in a city that finally, after all these years, felt like home. And that is the story of Isabella Thorne. She proved that your worth isn't determined by the label on your dress, but by the strength of your character. The people who laughed at her ended up with nothing, while the girl in the old clothes ended up with everything that truly mattered. Not just the money, but the truth, and a family she never knew she had. It's a powerful reminder that we never really know who we are talking to. The quiet person in the corner, the one you might overlook or even judge, could be the one who holds the keys to the kingdom. Kindness isn't just a virtue, Sometimes it's the smartest move you can make. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, justice, and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want to hear more stories about hidden lives and shocking twists, make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a video. I'll see you in the next story.